How we do this, we are the truest. Got these fangs super sharp, your shit toothless. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish. In the graveyard, acting foolish. Finna dance with the devil to no music. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish.
Oh, hello. It's a new episode of a podcast called Ghoulish. I am Max Booth, an undead host. And on today's episode, I am bringing you Section 3 of my new novel, Maggots Screaming. Section 3 is called Active Decay, named after the third stage of human decomposition. Now, this is an audiobook narrated by John Wayne Comunale. If you will subscribe to the podcast, or if you will just keeping track of recent episodes, you will know the last two episodes of the podcast will be previous two sections of the book. I'm releasing the entire book for free on my podcast. It's a great audiobook. I think John Wayne did a tremendous job with it. And I think it should be made available to anyone who wants to listen if they can't afford it. If you want to buy a copy of the audiobook, you can. It's available any place you get audiobooks. You can listen to the whole thing right now. It's like 10, maybe it's 11 hours long. Well, if you want to buy a signed copy of the paperback, you can go to ghoulishbooks.com. I will sign a copy to you. I will even draw a little cartoon maggot in it. It will be screaming. Ah! I think that's all I have to say, really. This is the next section of the book. I hope you're enjoying it so far. Let me know on social media, I guess. Tag me at Give Me Your Teeth. You'll tag the podcast at Ghoulish Pod. You can join the Ghoulish Discord. There's a link to that in the show notes. There should be, at least, assuming I don't forget. And maybe leave a review of the book once you finish it. That would be cool. Tell people about it. Say, hey, this lunatic is giving away the audiobook of his novel for free on the Ghoulish podcast. What a crazy time. What a crazy fucking universe we live in. Alright, that's all I got. See ya.
Ghoulish Books presents Maggots Screaming by Max Booth III. Narrated by John Wayne Comunale. Part 3. Active Decay. Maggots scream. I didn't know that until I started decomposing. Maybe it's not a commonly known fact, but it's true all the same. Maggots scream. It's hard to hear unless you get really close to them. That's what I had to do. I don't know why I did it, not exactly. Something about them was calling to me. Later, once we'd gotten you and the other bodies out of the garden grave and into the living room, Dad made me go into the bathroom to wash up a little bit, and it was in there that I finally took off my jacket and properly examined the wound on my arm again. I hadn't paid any attention to it since we left for the body farm earlier that evening. My first thought was, oh, it's healing, quickly followed by, no, wait, because that new layer of discolored white skin over the wound wasn't a layer of skin at all. And if you paid attention to the first half of this story, I'm sure you can already guess what it was. Maggots. They'd packed themselves into my dog bite until they were bursting out of the hole, falling out of my arm and splattering at my feet. My wound had reached maximum capacity. A normal person might have panicked and tried washing them out, like I'd done the last time this started happening. But I was beyond the point of normalcy. Vultures had attacked me at a body farm, and we'd removed our look-alike corpses from a grave for the second time in one weekend. There was nothing normal about anything anymore. So I did the only thing that made sense, and I lifted my arm and lowered my head so my ear was facing the wound, and I closed my eyes and submerged myself into a deep state of concentration, and what I heard were the screams of 100, 1,000 infinite maggots wriggling against each other as they feasted on a buffet of necrotic tissue. Wet, sticky screams. Screams that sounded like a casserole baking in the oven. Screams that sounded like milk pouring over Rice Krispies. Screams that sounded like babies begging for their mothers, for their fathers. Am I their father? Am I their mother? I wondered in one insane moment, but the moment kept stretching itself like elastic, and the question repeated in my head over and over, an echo pinballing around a black hole, traveling through all of time simultaneously. I desperately wanted to protect these maggots at all costs because, like it or not, they belonged to me. They were my responsibility. Once they screamed for you, that was it. They'd never trust anyone else again. We tried searching online for how to embalm ourselves, but all the guides sounded overly complicated. Most articles said we'd need a machine specifically designed for embalming, which we did not have. Plus, we'd have to make incisions at vein-breaking points, whatever that meant, and insert the fluid through special arteries. It became obvious very quickly the process wouldn't be as simple as swiping a bottle of embalming fluid from a body farm, and that we were all in way over our heads. "This is some bullshit, man," Andy said, squinting at a WikiHow article on his laptop titled "How to Embalm with Pictures," then grunted and slammed it shut. "More instructions than a goddamn IKEA bookshelf." "What does it matter anyway?" Dad said. "As long as it's in our bodies, right?" Without waiting on a response, he took off for a cabinet across the kitchen and pulled out 2 shot glasses layered in dust. "I don't think drinking is the way to go here, partner," Andy said, although there was something in his tone that seemed to suggest he wanted nothing more than to watch us drink it, a sick curiosity to know what would occur. He wasn't the only one in the kitchen feeling that way. Dad washed out the shot glasses and set them on the table. "Just think about it for a second, would you?" Dad said as the 3 of us stared at the experiment waiting to happen. "Regardless of whether it enters through a vein or down our throats, it's all going to the same place, right? It's going inside us. Wouldn't it still accomplish the same thing?" "Then why wouldn't they always drink it if that were the case?" "Because," Dad said, tapping his forehead like a man who believed he was far more brilliant than he was, "most dead people can't drink liquids." "And you can?" Andy said. "Of course we can." Dad gripped my shoulder. "You can drink, can't you?" "We couldn't drink water earlier," I said. "Well, that's different. Water's bullshit." "Oh?" I couldn't remember the last time I'd successfully drank something. Time seems to operate differently when you're dead. Everything moves like it has a slow internet connection, slowly buffering and periodically needing to reboot. "See?" Dad said to Andy. "He can drink. We both can. We can drink just fine." He unscrewed the cap off the bottle of embalming fluid and poured each glass full to the brim. The liquid was thick and pink, like Pepto-Bismol. Dad pushed one toward me and picked up the other, then said, "I knew you and I would share a shot together one day, but I figured it wouldn't be until your 16th birthday, and if I had to guess, we would have been drinking Jack Daniels. Not this, but hey, at least we're doing something together, and that doesn't involve watching TV, right? Your mom would be proud." Andy said, and we looked up, waiting for him to finish his thought. But he didn't seem to have anything else to say, so he shrugged and stepped back a little, giving us more room. "Okay," Dad said. "On the count of 3. Ready? I held the glass close to my nose, trying to give it a sniff, but my sense of smell hadn't returned, and, spoiler alert, it still hasn't. Later, Andy would tell us the stuff smelled nearly worse than we did. The scent was powerful, impossible to ignore. But what did it smell like? We'd ask, and he'd pause, thinking carefully before saying, pickles. So maybe it was a good thing I couldn't smell it, because there's no way I would have willfully guzzled a pink beverage that smelled like pickles. Although, to be fair, and again, this is another spoiler alert, it's not like the embalming fluid helped us. Even the additional shots, one after another, Dad and I sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, sloshing glasses together and saying cheers while Andy stood against the sink, shaking his head disapprovingly while nibbling on the rest of his Taco Bell. Comrade bouncing around between us, indecisive about whose dinner she wanted to steal the most. In the end, she wasn't able to get her paws on either, and she curled up in the corner of the room facing the wall, which was her way of throwing a dog temper tantrum. She probably wouldn't have been so depressed if she'd known how much food awaited her future. More food than the luckiest, richest dog in the universe. Of course, that wouldn't come until later. But not that much later. Last year, for science, we had to research and write a report on something that grows in nature. At first, we were allowed to pick our own topics, but it quickly became apparent that everybody planned on writing something centered on bluebonnets, since they're the state flower, and even the stupidest kid in school already knows a little bit about them. So our teacher decided it would only be fair if she devised a list herself and then assigned us which plants to research. Somehow, I ended up with the corpse flower, aka the Amorphophallus titanum, rooted from the Greek words for shapeless, penis, and huge. Yeah, I also giggled when I discovered that. I couldn't believe the school was letting me write a report about something with the word penis in its name. Although, in retrospect, maybe the whole thing had been a trick, because suddenly I went from not caring in the slightest about the project to finding myself fully invested in learning everything I could about this plant, which is nicknamed the corpse flower due to the rotten, dead body odor it emits. In order for the corpse flower to pollinate, it has to have, at the base of its spadix, a band of cream male flowers above a ring of the larger female flowers. When they were ready, the spadix emits this rotten, dead body smell to attract nearby insects, mostly large carrion beetles, easily lured by the delectable stank of decaying flesh, as well as other nocturnal insects that usually lay eggs and rotting meat. Insects that neither of us are strangers to at this point, right? The kind of insects we might as well consider family if we're being honest. The only true family we have left, anyway. So much about this flower is unknown, especially what compounds are present in creating its iconic death odor. Sulfurous chemicals. The chemicals responsible for the smell of rotten eggs are definitely there, as well as the two compounds cadaverine and putrescine, which are produced during the breaking down of flesh. Let me say that again in case you're having a little trouble hearing. The breaking down of flesh. Does that not also define autolysis, aka the first stage of decomposition? And although they're mostly found in Sumatra, that doesn't mean people haven't tried growing them in the United States, even in Texas. I remember while researching corpse flowers, reading about one that had recently bloomed at the Moody Gardens Rainforest Pyramid in Galveston. They'd named the flower Morticia, although I'd missed the live stream by a couple years. The website had a time-lapse video of the blooming available, and I remember sitting in front of the school computer watching it over and over, the whole clip lasting barely over a minute. The way it slowly peeled apart like a jaw unhinging. The word that came to mind then and the word that comes to mind now is the same. Majestic. So tell me something then. If birds are known to feast on these corpse flowers and later scatter their seeds, is it really that insane to imagine a few of these seeds landing in our backyard? Not just our backyard, but right in the same section my mom had planted her garden? Improbable, maybe, but impossible? And since so much is unknown about these things, who's to say what might happen if a corpse flower seed's mixed with certain soil or certain other plants? Nobody knows anything, not really. But thinking about these corpse flowers and thinking about you and the rest of your dead family in that garden grave, thinking about the way Dad and I reeked like dead rotten meat despite being alive, or at least somewhat alive, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something to this theory. Because if not this, then what else? What else could have possibly caused this? That's what I'm asking you, yes, but it's also what I asked my dad. This was a few hours after we'd finished off the pink bottle together. Andy was complaining about the way we all smelled, and at some point he used the phrase rotten meat, and suddenly all I could think about was the science report I'd written about corpse flowers. What if, I said after spitting out year-old research at them, what if that's the thing causing all this? What if birds scattered corpse flower seeds in our backyard? Dad said, the tone in his voice suggesting he was waiting on a punchline that didn't exist. Yeah, I said, nodding, excited. Doesn't it make sense? And he looked at me for a long time, not saying anything, before sighing and taking away my shot glass. Boy, he finally replied, I think you've gone and gotten your ass drunk off embalming fluid. Besides, Dad said, I already know what caused this, and it wasn't no corpse flower bullshit. Oh, is that so? Andy said, cracking open another of Dad's beers. You mind enlightening us so we can all stop wasting our fucking time then? Of course. Dad tried to crack his knuckles, but only succeeded in repositioning the loose skin around his fingers. Everybody grimaced, and he hid his hands under the kitchen table, embarrassed. Then he continued to tell us about the ecosystem he accidentally created last summer, which would have been his first summer alone after the divorce. The fuck you talking about? Andy asked, cigarette dangling from his mouth. What ecosystem? Well, if you'd give me a chance to explain, I'd tell you. Okay, shit, pardon me. Please, by all means. Dad hesitated, waiting to see if Andy was going to interrupt him again, and then went on to explain that really, if we wanted to get technical, all this shit was the HOA's fault. Personally, he said, I don't understand what the big goddamn deal is with having a short lawn. Everybody's so precious about having the best-looking yard. Who cares? What does it matter? Let it grow. It's Mother Nature. The planet's worked perfectly fine for the last 1.5 billion years with grass being able to grow as high as it wants. I think the planet's older than 1.5 billion years, I said. I think it's almost 5 billion. Okay, so then 5 billion. That further proves my point. Well, actually, Andy said, the number's irrelevant if you accept the simulation theory. Oh, here we fucking go. They were already moving too fast for me to catch up. What's the simulation theory? Andy said. It's like the Matrix, but with less trench coats. The planet's not real, basically, Andy said. In fact, none of this bullshit's real. It's all computer trickery, an artificial simulation. This so-called Earth might be 0 days old. You know what I mean? Memories are programmed. Yesterday? Never fucking happened. He cleared his throat, took another drag of his cigarette. Assuming, again, y'all buy into that shit. Personally, I don't know, man. I just don't know. But it certainly makes you think, don't it? Which, in retrospect, might be the most dangerous trap of them all. Dad held up the empty bottle of embalming fluid. Did you sneak a shot of this, too? because you sound insane, like more than usual, I mean. Insane with the truth, brother, Andy said and winked. What happened with the HOA? I asked, afraid we'd never get back on topic with Andy present. The HOA? Dad said. I'll tell you what happened with the goddamn HOA. Okay, I said, when he didn't continue after half a minute. Dad glanced around the room like he'd forgotten where he was, then said, So there I was, right? Minding my own goddamn business, not bothering anybody whatsoever, or so I thought, until I get this email from the HOA with a picture of my front yard telling me some stupid crap like my grass is too tall and it's upsetting my neighbors, and if I don't cut it, they're going to fine me every month until I do. Imagine being so fragile that tall grass upsets you. What a goddamn joke, man. Some people, they ain't got no lives, I'm telling you. You ever read Bentley Little? Andy asked. He has this book, The Association, I think. Read that shit. You'll never live anywhere near where an HOA's in charge again. There's some evil-ass motherfuckers, man. No doubt. So what happened? I asked, confused why I'd never heard anything about this before. It was true, I no longer lived there, but I still visited every other weekend. What happened? Dad said. What happened was I mowed the yard. Gotta say, Andy popped another beer, and foam slowly erupted from the top. This story is pretty goddamn thrilling. Well, what happened after I mowed is when it gets more interesting. Maybe you should have skipped to that to begin with. Anyway, Dad said, after I finished up, I did what I always do and dumped all the pulverized grass into a small trash can. But it was almost a week until garbage day, meaning I couldn't drag it out to the curb yet, so I said screw it. Left it on the side of the house next to our fence gate. Figured I'd come get it in a couple days. Except, come garbage day, I completely blanked on the small trash can full of grass. And then it rained for like 5 days straight, directly into that can, jam-packed with cut grass. And I forgot about it some more, given plenty of time for all that rainwater to fully soak in. When I finally did remember the trash can, it was because of the smell. I'll never forget that smell. You have no idea. Andy motioned around the kitchen. I think maybe I have some idea, actually. Dad held up his index, middle, and ring fingers. 3 words. Rotting, primordial, ooze. I wanted to ask him what primordial meant, but he seemed to be too deep in the zone to be interrupted. Whatever it was, it sounded terrifying. He continued. The kind of smell that makes you start gagging immediately. I never smelled anything like it before in my life. To get close, I had to first go inside and wrap a bandana around my nose and mouth. Oh, shit, Andy said. That's a great idea. Do you still have it? Do I have what? The bandana. Dad gestured over at a kitchen drawer. Andy eagerly pulled the drawer open and scavenged through its contents. Got it, he said, excited, and held up an old red bandana. Then he brought it closer to his face and grimaced. God damn it! It smells just like you guys. You've contaminated everything inside this house. He dropped the bandana in the drawer and slammed it shut with his hip. What did the can look like, Dad? I asked. Well, it's the oddest thing, he said. Because if you remember, the bottom of that specific trash can has a crack along the bottom, meaning you'd think all the water would have, drained out. Except, I guess all the grass bunched up like that. It created this sort of wall, this sponge that soaked all the rain up, filling the can right to the brim with this dirty brown water. But that wasn't even the most disgusting part, right? No, because also in this can, on top of the waterlogged grass, were all these insects. I'm talking like sow bugs and pill bugs and maggots and anything else that feeds. All of them grouped together like they were a church or something, like they'd established an entire society within my little trash can. What did you do? I asked, trying to disguise how hurt I was feeling while hearing all of this. Why hadn't he ever shown me? I would have loved to see it. My first thought was to drag it out to the curb and let the garbage people take care of it. Garbage people? Andy said. Wow, that's a psychotic way to describe another human being. What are you talking about? That's what they are. Garbage people. I think the only garbage person here is you, sir. Would you just shut up? Dad said. Anyway, 2 things were wrong with this idea. One, I didn't think the people who work with the trash company would empty it into their truck. Don't they have some kind of rule about liquids? And 2, I couldn't pick it up. At me only, he asked. You remember that time our washing machine broke mid-cycle and we had to wrestle all the clothes into the trash bag and take it to the laundromat because they were soaked with soapy water? Remember how much heavier the clothes were with all that water in them? Well, it was like that, only instead of clothes, it was grass, and a lot of it, filled to the very top. Anytime I tried nudging it a little, the stuff would start spilling everywhere. Which maybe sounds like a good thing, sure, but let me remind you how much it all smelled. I didn't want that shit all over my yard reeking up the place. He pointed at Andy. And before you say anything, yes, I already know the current state of things. You don't need to remind me. It's really bad, man. What do you want me to do about it? Andy considered, then shrugged. I don't honestly know if there is a solution beyond nuking the place from orbit. Helpful feedback, Dad said. Thank you. Anytime. Dad went on to tell us that since he couldn't move it, he decided to leave it there in his yard for a couple days. Let the sun dry it out until the weight loosened a little. Except, he said, irritated, the goddamn water only got muddier, thicker. And the insects multiplied. The moment you stepped within 5 feet of the goddamn trash can, flies started swarming your face. Sound familiar? He gestured vaguely around us at the flying insects I'd almost forgotten had taken over the kitchen. At that point, only Comrade seemed to pay attention to him. We'd lost count of how many of them she'd already eaten. Dad continued. So I finally decided, fuck it. Wasn't like I had many options at that point, right? I grabbed the can by the edge and started dragging it across the yard, brown, muddy bug water splashing on my hands, my shoes. It wasn't a pretty sight. At one point, I cut my goddamn hand on the can, a place where the plastic's been cracked from the heat, and I start bleeding everywhere. But do I stop and go inside to take care of my wound? Of course not. I got a job to do, and I intend on carrying it out to the very end. I keep pulling the can until I get to my destination. Anyone want to guess where that was? Neither of us had to speak the answer to know it was true. Mom's garden. He dumped the can in Mom's garden. Wait, Andy said, blowing a cloud of smoke at the flies. Why would something like that have caused, well, you know. Ain't you listening, goddammit? Dad said. I told you. The stuff in that can, it had turned into something weird. It was a goddamn ecosystem. Don't you find it a little odd that I unload it there and then... But that doesn't explain why it... What, replicated you guys? But it does, Dad said, excited. Don't you get it? I cut myself. I bled into the goddamn can. It had my DNA. It could have used the blood and, I don't know, isn't that how they make clones in movies? All it takes is a small, little, itty-bitty speck of a person to make a whole new person, right? Plus, Dylan came from me, right? He's got my DNA. Who knows what crazy alien shit was in that can? What kind of technology it might have had. And plus, think about this, okay? This happened last year, right? How long do you think it properly takes to grow a human? About 9 months, Andy said. I'm pretty sure that's been heavily documented. But that's just a baby. I'm talking about the bodies we found in our garden. They were fully formed, right? 2 adults, 1 kid. Makes sense it'd take a little longer than 9 months, right? About a year. Yeah, that sounds right. Especially if they're growing in some weird ecosystem from another world or whatever the hell that was exactly I dumped out of the trash can. Nah, Andy said, still not buying it. Because what about Lori then? Did you forget about her all of a sudden? As far as I know, you and her don't share DNA, not the kind that makes up a person's biology at least. Unless y'all been brother and sister this whole time, in which case I got some Pornhub videos to show you later that you might enjoy. Dad settled in his seat, disappointed. I guess I hadn't thought of that. Unless... Andy held up his finger like a great idea had suddenly struck him. Dylan, block your ears. Then, before I had a chance to comprehend what he told me to do, he said to Dad, Now, don't get offended by this question or anything, okay? But back when you and Lori were together, did you ever, fuck during your period? More importantly, did you ever eat her out during it? Because I have a theory. Dad stared at him for nearly a full minute before saying, I think perhaps it's about time you went home. Later, after we finally convinced Andy to leave, I said to Dad, What if both our ideas are right? And I could tell from the way he looked at me that he had no idea what I was talking about. So I elaborated. What if you dumped the ecosystem in the garden and then birds scattered corpse flower seeds in it? What if combined, that's what it takes to grow some bodies? What if we both did it together? What if we're both responsible? I wanted to ask, but didn't. With Andy gone, it was just the 2 of us again. Well, I guess to be more accurate, the 5 of us. Me, Dad, plus you, dead Dad, and dead Mom. The whole dang family in the living room together, watching television. Plus Comrade, since Andy had left her here. Didn't ask if we would babysit her or anything. Assumed we didn't have a problem with her staying, which we didn't, of course. Comrade is the best dog I've ever known. I often wished she always lived with us. She spent most of her time that evening in the kitchen, smashing her head against the glass of the back door in an attempt to kill flies and eat their corpses. She was having the time of her life. We were on season 6 of our annual rewatch of The Simpsons. Dad owned the first 20 seasons on DVD. The entire series could be found on streaming websites, but Dad insisted we use discs as much as possible, since he'd paid good money for those first 20 DVD collections. After seasons 20, the production company had decided to stop releasing physical media, which pissed Dad off to no end, and me too, if we're being honest. I love sitting on the floor, legs folded beneath me, flipping through those booklets that come with every box set, reading those episode guides, the little jokes they'd managed to squeeze into the artwork. Plus, most of the DVDs contain special features, like commentaries and deleted scenes and all other types of cool stuff, and Dad and I often went through them all after finishing our annual rewatch of each season. Streaming websites never offered any cool bonus material. Not only that, but they also automatically minimized and fast-forwarded through the credits. Dad said this was because the world had gotten lazier. No one was interested in how anything was made anymore, he told me. They just wanted more without taking the time to appreciate the creators. I still remember the day we watched a newer episode on a streaming site, and it provided us with the option to skip the intro, aka one of the best parts of any Simpsons episode. Dad got so mad, I thought he was going to throw the remote through the TV. Instead, he walked outside and paced in the front yard for a couple minutes, then came inside and drank a shot of whiskey before agreeing to continue the show. Since we could no longer sleep, and leaving the house seemed pretty risky, we figured marathoning The Simpsons would be a good way to pass the time. Without Andy here, the constant talking had died down. But what more did Dad and I have to say to each other at that point? Not much. When we talked, All we had to say were questions, and nobody had any answers. So why not watch cartoons instead? What else was there to do? Season 6, Episode 6 of The Simpsons is one of my favorite episodes of all time. So when we finally made it there, I was probably as excited as any undead 13-year-old boy could possibly be, given the circumstances. It was a Halloween episode. Treehouse of Horror 5, not 6, because the Halloween specials didn't begin until Season 2. I remember, either last year or the year before, our teacher referencing something related to Roman numerals, and I was the only kid who understood what she meant. For a brief minute, the whole class was impressed, including our teacher. And what did I have to thank for that? The Simpsons. But also, my dad. If not for him, would I know what The Simpsons was? Treehouse of Horror 5, like all of their Halloween specials, is split into 3 sections, with 2 bookends at the beginning and end of the episode. I know you've seen it at least once since you were there in the living room with us that night, but in case you need a quick refresher, here you go. It starts out with Marge walking out behind a red curtain and waving at the screen. She tries to introduce the show, only to be handed a letter announcing the episode is so scary that Congress won't let them broadcast it. As an alternative, Congress suggests playing the 1947 classic Glenn Ford movie 200 Miles to Oregon, and the screen cuts to an old black and white clip of horses dragging carriages in the desert. Dad and I once tried finding 200 Miles to Oregon, but after investigating Wikipedia, we concluded it doesn't exist. Glenn Ford was apparently a real actor, but nowhere in his credits is 200 Miles to Oregon listed. The writers of The Simpsons must have made it up. But then, what movie did they show us? Like most mysteries, I'll probably never figure it out, and that's okay, because what other choice do I have? I either accept the lack of knowledge or allow it to eat me from the inside out. And speaking of inside out, let's continue. The fake 200 Miles to Oregon movie doesn't last long before Bart somehow intercepts the signal and resumes the legitimate programming. And we get our first story, which is a parody of The Shining, except here it's called The Shinin'. Shh, you don't want to get sued. Followed by a story where Homer discovers his toaster is a time machine. Then it concludes with the school segment about the teachers eating all of their students, which, thanks to this episode, was a real fear of mine during my first couple of years of going to school. The second bookend of this treehouse of horror begins with Bart waking up to Marge standing above him, offering reassurance that everything we've witnessed has been nothing more than a terrible nightmare. You're back with your family now, where there's nothing to be afraid of. She comforts him before adding, except that fog that turns people inside out. A green gas quickly enters through Bart's window. Stupid cheap weather stripping. And forces its way into each of the Simpsons, promptly reversing their flesh in one of the most disturbing sequences of animation I've ever witnessed. Even Marge's hair gets turned into weird pink flesh, which has always made me wonder how long her skull really is under all that blue dye. Inside out, the Simpsons family reserves a period of calm introspection to examine their new bodies, but not too long, as music starts playing and someone or something off-screen flings top hats and canes towards them, and they're dancing and singing, and despite the fact that their biologies have been forever manipulated, they seem to be having a pretty good time together, including when the family dog digs into Bart's intestines and drags him off stage. I've watched this episode probably more times than any other episode of The Simpsons, but that night, it struck a different chord than previous viewings. In the past, I'd always cringed during the fog epilogue. It's disturbing and creepy and all kinds of wrong. Nothing about it is natural or honestly funny. It's just scary. Even with the accompanying song and dance, it's ghoulish. Except when we watched it with you and the other corpses, something changed. It's hard to describe, but as we all sat together in the living room watching it as one big undead family, I couldn't help but feel strangely optimistic. Because Here was this family, turned completely inside out from a mysterious fog, and what did they do? They didn't sit around complaining about their lives. They didn't constantly ask each other, why do you think the fog turns us inside out? Or how can we turn ourselves inside in again? They got up and danced and sang and acted like everything was perfectly fine. And in that brief moment, I truly believed everything was fine. If they could continue on despite their bizarre condition, then why couldn't we? Of course, the answer is simple. The Simpsons is a cartoon. It's not real. But what about the stuff happening to us? Is that real? How are we supposed to determine what is reality and what is a cartoon? And what if there isn't any difference after all? What if everything and nothing are simultaneously real and make-believe? And what if discovering the answers to any of these questions doesn't change a darn thing? At some point in the middle of the night, Dad's phone started ringing, and Mom's face filled the screen. Some photo we'd taken of her from back when they were married. In the picture, she's smiling and staring at the photographer, Dad, like she still loves him. This was before they'd had me, and I wonder if she ever looked at him like that once I was alive. Somehow, I already know the answer. I paused the current episode of The Simpsons we were on and leaned closer so I could hear her once he finally answered, except there was something wrong with his phone. Every time he tried swiping the screen, nothing happened. It refused to recognize his thumb. He used his other fingers and received the same lackluster result. "What the fuck?" he said, swiping harder. "What the fuck?" "Why won't it answer?" I asked. "Does it look like I know, Dylan?" "But it's Mom. She's calling." He looked up from the phone like he wanted to break it over my head. "Would you be quiet and let me think?" The phone had been ringing for a while. Any second, it'd go to his voicemail and we'd miss our chance to talk to her. He tried swiping again, failed, then thrust the device out to me. "Here, quick, you try." I took it from him, but it was no use. The screen didn't recognize me either. "What's going on?" I said. "Is it broken?" The phone stopped ringing. Dad held both his hands out, palms toward him, fingers spread and arched inward. Several minutes passed before he said, "Phones don't respond to dead skin." "Maybe if I had a cell phone—"
"Oh, would you knock it off?" Dad said. "If you had one, we'd be encountering the same issue. It wouldn't change a thing."
"I'm just saying."
"I know what you're saying."
The phone beeped and a new voicemail notification generated on the screen. We weren't able to navigate to that either. The whole thing was useless when operated by one of us. Dad took it from me and tossed it on the coffee table, then told me to click play so we could resume The Simpsons. I held out the remote, hesitating. "What do you think she wanted to tell us?"
"I don't know."
"Do you think she's okay?"
"I think she's as okay as we are."
"Oh," I said, then, "Are we okay?"
"I don't think so."
"Do you still think she's in the hospital?"
"I don't know where she is."
"Should we drive on down there?" I asked. "To Corpus Christi?"
"It's probably not a good idea."
"Why not?"
"Are you gonna hit play or not?"
"I'm worried about Mom."
"I know you are. I am too."
"What are we gonna do?"
"We're gonna watch The Simpsons until Andy comes back tomorrow. Then we're gonna have him unlock my phone so he can listen to the voicemail. I don't know what we'll do after that. I guess it depends on what she has to say."
"Oh," I said, thinking that wasn't the worst plan I'd ever heard of. "Okay, then." I clicked play, and we resumed our annual Simpsons rewatch. It didn't occur to me until later in the night that neither of us were laughing at the jokes we usually found hilarious. The gags that we often quoted to each other around the house, they felt different. Two-dimensional, kinda. Hollow. I guess it's hard to focus on much of anything when you're rotting away to nothing, but then again, I guess you already know that. Morning came, and we weren't close to finishing the series rewatch, so we kept going, because
What else are we supposed to do? We couldn't sleep. We couldn't go anywhere. We were stuck until Andy showed up, stranded on Purgatory Creek. At noon, he finally called, but of course we couldn't answer it, so it went to voicemail. Then a series of texts from him generated on Dad's screen, none of them saying anything important besides "call me back" and "are you okay?" "What do you think he's doing? Why isn't he here?" I asked as we stared at the phone. Neither of us could operate. In addition to flies, the kitchen had recently greeted its share of yellow jackets and wasps. Sometimes they landed on us, but we didn't seem to care that much. If they wanted to hang out, then they could hang out. Who were we to stop them? "I don't know," Dad said. "Probably chickened out on us or something." "What are we going to do if he doesn't come back?" "I guess we'll just have to figure this shit out by ourselves, which honestly might be for the best anyway." "But we need his help to listen to Mom's voicemail." "I'm definitely starting to see the flaws in modern technology." Dad tossed the phone on the coffee table. "Yes, me. Future's pretty goddamn retarded." "Dad," I said, "don't say that word." "Oh, shut up. What does it matter? We're dead. We can say anything we want." "I don't know." He leaned forward, face animated with a new excitement. "You think I care if you start saying shit and fuck and dick? Might as well get 'em out of your system while we got a chance." "What?" I said. "Do you think—" "I don't know what I think. I just know what I feel, and what I feel is fucking nothing. I don't know about you, son, but I imagine a regular person would be scared shitless right about now. Not me, though. Something in my chemistry is changing. Like, this is the new me, you know? Like, maybe this is how we go on with life. Undead. A couple of ghouls. So if you want to curse, why the fuck not, right? Ain't we beyond the boundaries of a normal father and son relationship?" He paused, thinking it over. "Okay, that last sentence sounded a little creepy, but you know what I mean. It's not like I'm gonna fucking ground you, right? You can't ground what ain't alive, and you, baby boy, are no longer alive. And neither am I. So yeah, go ahead, say fuck. Do it. Scream it." "I don't really want to," I said, truthful. "Not even a shit or a dick?" "Maybe later, okay?" He slumped his shoulders, disappointed. "Yeah, okay. Maybe later." "Do you think we're going to become skeletons?" I asked. "What?" "Skeletons. Like at the farm. The last stage of decomposition." "Yeah," he said without much hesitation. "Yeah, we probably will." "Are we going to be able to move around and talk?" "Why wouldn't we?" I thought he might have been joking with me, but he seemed genuinely confused by the question. "Because won't our lungs go away?" "What? Where would they go?" "I thought maybe they melted out of you with all the other purge fluid." "Please don't say purge fluid," Dad said. I thought you said I could say anything I wanted." "I know, but not that. It's too gross." "But that's what the lady at the farm called it." "Yeah," Dad said, "but that lady was nuts." "She was?" Yeah. She thinks she's a wizard." "A wizard?" "Didn't you see it on her little golf cart? She spray painted The Wiz on it. What kind of sane person thinks they're a wizard?" "I thought it was because of her name." "What are you talking about?" "Dr. Winsenreed?" Dad stared at me so long without responding, I started suspecting something inside him had shut down. Then he said, "Wait, do you need lungs to talk? I thought they were for breathing." "I don't know," I said. "I don't know what we need." "Shit, Dylan, don't they teach you health in school?" "I don't know. I guess so." "And what have they taught you?" I tried to think of anything besides corpse flower statistics and failed, so to change the subject, I told him his stomach didn't look so fat anymore, which was true. "Yeah, same with you," he said, and I followed his gaze to my own gut, or lack of a gut maybe. I lifted my shirt up and felt around my stomach, which hadn't so much shrunk as deflated. The extra skin was there, but it was loose, like I could grab a handful and readjust its positioning if the desire struck.
Inspecting our bodies led to us discovering a copious amount of purge fluid had leaked from our orifices since the last time we checked. Trails of slime seemed to follow us around the house. Looking at Dad, really looking at him, I determined the only accurate word to describe him was wet. And the same word applied to myself. Our inner liquids had spilled everywhere, adding weight to our clothes and sticking everything against our loose skin. Skin so fragile, I was convinced most of it would peel off my skeleton if I pulled hard enough. I bounced between wanting to see what that might look like and never ever wanting to find out. "Your mom always got on my ass about losing weight," Dad said. "Who would have thought it would be this easy? All this time, all I had to do was decompose. Do you think maybe we could start some kind of diet program? Get a book published? Schedule regular Decay meetups at the local gym? Might be an easy way to get rich. I don't know." "How would the other people also decompose?" I asked. Dad said, thinking it over. "I guess we'd have to kill them, wouldn't we?" "How would you kill them?" "That's a good question, son. I've never killed anybody before. What about you?" "I've never killed anybody either," I said, shaking my head and trying not to think about frogs. Dad paused for a second, thinking something over, then reached into his mouth and started digging around his teeth like he had popcorn stuck in there. Instead of a kernel, he pulled out a little maggot. He grimaced and flicked it across the kitchen. Comrade followed the trajectory and licked it up before the 5-second rule could be broken. "I'm never going to get used to these goddamn things." "They're not so bad." I held up my left arm, showing off the open bite wound. The maggots inside wriggled in greeting. Dad took one look at them and stepped back, thoroughly disgusted. "Dylan, oh man, you gotta wash those out." "I like them." "You like them?" "They're not hurting me." "Dylan, they're literally eating you." "That's okay, I don't mind." "You don't mind?" "No, I don't think so. Here, let me see that again." This time, when I showed him my arm, he grabbed it with one hand and scooped up the salt shaker on the table with his other. Before I could comprehend the situation, he started sprinkling salt into my open wound. I wrestled away from him and said, "What are you doing?" "Isn't that what the body farm lady said to do to get rid of maggots? You gotta salt them. Salt or, boiling water. Yeah, let's boil some water. Cook those little bastards alive." "No, Dad," I said and stormed down the hallway into my bedroom. I slammed the door shut and hid under my blanket, expecting him to follow, but he never did. Maybe he was just trying to scare me. Either way, I discovered it was sort of nice being covered up like that, shielded by darkness, the same way we'd been covering the three of you on the living room couch. I felt connected to you in a way I hadn't previously. I could have stayed under that blanket forever. I held up my left arm and pressed my ear against the wound and listened to the maggots screaming for attention, like babies crying in their cribs, begging to be fed, begging to be held, begging not to be abandoned. This was a frightening, confusing world they'd hatched into. Of course they were scared. "It's gonna be okay," I whispered. "It's gonna be okay." And they responded. I heard them. They spoke to me. But what they said is something I'll never confess, not even to you. This one's my little secret. Later that evening, when the front door swung open and Andy rushed inside, nobody reacted. The Simpsons was playing, but I'm not sure either of us were really watching it at that point. Looking at the screen, yeah, but it was getting harder and harder to concentrate on television, to make sense of the audio and the visuals. Characters were moving and talking, but I wouldn't have been able to say what they were doing or talking about, not even for $1 million. Although, let's be honest, what good is money when you're dead? "The hell's going on in here?" Andy asked, sweaty and scared. Comrade wagged her tail from the couch, not by you, but by me. I gave her a little pat on the head for choosing wisely, then brushed her away when she started gnawing on my fingers. "Oh, hey," Dad said, offering a lazy wave. "We're watching The Simpsons if you want to join." "Yeah," I said. "It's our annual rewatch." Andy closed the door and flipped on the living room light. "I've been calling you all goddamn day." "I can't answer my phone." "What are you talking about?" Dad held up his hand as if it would explain everything. "It doesn't recognize me anymore. Him either." He jabbed a thumb over toward me. "We've become obsolete." "Where were you?" I asked. "Me?" Andy asked as if it was a ridiculous question. "I was at work, which is where both your dad and I were supposed to be today." He side-eyed Dad. "But don't worry, I covered for you. Told him you picked up some kind of bug." A repulsive snorting noise erupted from Dad's throat. Then he reached into his mouth and pulled out the fattest maggot I'd ever seen in my life, and non-life. He raised it over his head and waved it around like a tiny flag. "Well, you weren't wrong." He flicked the maggot across the room, and Comrade slurped it up. She sat and stared at Dad, wagging her tail as she waited for another helping. He scavenged a handful of them out of his gums and tossed them on the carpet. Comrade went to town on the greatest buffet in the world. "Man, don't feed her that shit," Andy said, disgusted. "She's gonna get sick." Andy lingered at the closed front door, studying all of us in the living room. Me, Dad, you, dead Dad and dead Mom, then sighed. "Where am I supposed to sit? There's nowhere to sit in here. This is ridiculous." "So, you were at work, huh?" Dad said. "That's where you were." "Oh, come on. Can't we go into the kitchen or something? It's too creepy being this close to them." Dad glanced at you and the other corpses with surprise, like he'd forgotten you were with us. "Dad," I said, wondering if he'd forgotten about something else as well, "are you going to ask him about the voicemail?" "Oh, yeah." Dad pointed at the coffee table. "Lori called last night and left a message." "What? Are you serious? What did she say?" "Well, we was hoping you'd fill us in on that, considering I already goddamn told you I can't use the thing anymore." We took the phone into the kitchen. At first, I wasn't sure why it mattered, then it dawned on me. Dad didn't want you or the other two corpses hearing what Mom had to say, and I agreed. At that point, we were uncertain how much you could hear or comprehend, but it was probably smart not to take any unnecessary chances. After all, how are we supposed to know if you were friends or enemies? I mean, come on. Even now, I don't really know the answer to that one. And I don't think you do either. Anyway, I'm sure it's safe to tell you about the voicemail. It's not like we learned much from it. And if we had, what exactly would you do with the information? It's a bit too late, don't you think? You do think, don't you? At least a little bit. You must. But the question is, are your thoughts different than my own? Or do we share the same cloud? It wasn't even Mom who had left the message anyway. It was Miguel. "Hey man, it's me again, calling from Laura's phone since mine's about to die. So, a little update on the situation over here. Things have gotten a little dicey, I'd say. Some fucking government suits rolled up and quarantined the ward they have her staying in. Won't let me go in. Won't answer any of my goddamn questions. Won't do anything. The only reason I have her phone is she left it in my car, which is where I'm sitting out in the parking lot. Just waiting, I guess. Waiting on what? I don't even know. But I sure as hell ain't gonna leave her here. Call me back when you can. I would suggest you and Dylan coming out here, but honestly, I don't know what good it'd do. They're not letting anybody in to see her. I don't know if she's got something contagious or what the fuck. I don't know a goddamn thing. These fuckers. Anyway, listen, I know you and we ain't exactly on the best of terms these days, but I hope you can put our feud on hold until this is over with. We both want the same thing, after all, for Lori to recover, right? From whatever the hell is going on. Jesus Christ. Don't tell Dylan I said this, but before they kick me out, she wasn't looking too good. Her skin was, well, let's just say it was weird. I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared.
Anyway, fuck it. Call me or text me or whatever. I don't know who else to talk to right now. After the voicemail ended, Andy said, "Don't know who else to talk to? Shit, I guess I'm just some asshole the both of you have to deal with. Is that it?" "Should we go down there?" I asked. "I don't know," Dad said. Then to Andy, "Call him back and put him on speaker." Andy pressed Mom's name on Dad's phone and placed it screen up on the kitchen table between us. Instead of ringing, it transferred us directly to her voicemail, the way it would if she was on the phone with someone else or if the battery had died. "Lori? Miguel?" Dad said into the phone. "Please call back when you can. I think we need to talk." "I'm here too," Andy said. "If that means anything to you, of course." He ended the call, leaving the phone on the table. We all studied it, waiting for it to start vibrating again with a new call, but after 10 minutes of inactivity, we decided if a watched pot never boiled, then surely that meant a watched phone never rang. "Well, shit," Andy said, cracking his knuckles against his skull. "Now what?" "I don't know," Dad said. "I was hoping you might have some ideas. We've just been watching The Simpsons since you left." "Which seasons?" "All of them." Andy grimaced. "God damn, that's rough." "Hey," I said, "I like the new seasons." "That's because you are a dumb child who hasn't developed good taste yet," Andy said. "You think everything's good." And before I realized what was coming out of my mouth, I responded, "Fuck you, they're funny." Andy gasped and glanced toward Dad for help. Dad shrugged and said, "I told him he can say fuck now, considering the situation we're in." "Oh," Andy said, nodding like it made perfect sense. "That was pretty cool of you to do." "Thanks," Dad said. "I thought so too." "Well, in that case," Andy said, focused on me again, "fuck you too, you little piece of shit." It was the most he and I had ever bonded. "Anyway," Andy said, "it's a good thing I'm here, isn't it?" "Is it?" Dad asked, and Andy frowned. "Hey, fuck you too, partner. You and your goddamn kid treating me like that. I ought to go home and let you fend for yourselves. To think, I even brought y'all some special supplies on the way over here." "What kind of supplies?" "Why don't you ask nicely and I'll tell you." "What kind of fucking supplies?" Andy laughed and wiped sweat from his lip. "You know, I said this before, but I'm going to say it again. This house reeks. Seriously, y'all should be goddamn embarrassed." "Andy," Dad said, "what did you bring?" He grinned. "Some pretty cool shit, if I do say so myself." Andy went out to his truck and returned with a duffel bag, which he unloaded on the living room floor. Once Comrade realized the bag didn't contain any treats, she returned to her attempts of gnawing on my calves. "So," Andy said, kneeling over the bag, "the way I see it, these fuckers you found in the backyard are clearly dead. They look like you, they're rotting the same way, but where y'all seem to differ is the fact that they can't get up and move around or anything like that. And also, they can't communicate. I ain't heard a goddamn peep out of one of them since I've been here. Have you?" "No," Dad said. "They aren't talking." "Right, exactly. So, I was thinking about that today while on my route, and I got to thinking maybe because they aren't talking, it doesn't mean they can't. Maybe we just ain't, listening the right way. Hence." He removed his laptop from the bag and opened it with the screen facing us. On the browser, a video resumed playing at the midway point, which consisted of several men and women, all of them nude and in various states of arousal. Loud moans filled the living room. Comrade scrambled into the kitchen, terrified by the sudden noise intrusion. "What the hell are you doing?" Dad asked, trying to block my eyes with his loose-skinned arm. Andy panicked and spun the laptop around toward him and exited out of the browser. "Oh, sorry about that." He clicked a couple more times, then said, "Okay, here, look at this." He rotated the laptop again, showing us a different web page, another WikiHow article.
This one was titled, How to Talk to the Dead, 10 Steps, with pictures. Is that real? I asked, already wondering what questions I would ask you if given the chance.
Of course not, Dad said.
Wait, why are you so quick to dismiss it? Andy asked. Why not give it a chance? You never know.
Because it's ridiculous.
As ridiculous as hanging out here with a set of freaky, deaky doppelgangers? Brother, don't you think we've exceeded the realm of criticizing what is and ain't ridiculous? Dad responded a little quieter.
Okay, so what are we trying to do exactly? Isn't shit like this usually for spirits, not like actual physical bodies?
Sure, maybe, but who knows? Andy said. Who's to say there ain't also spirits or whatever in this very room attached to the bodies and we can't see them? Hell, I ain't even saying spirits are real. If you'd asked me a couple days ago, I'd have laughed in your goddamn face. But now, I guess we'd be morons if we didn't at least give it a shot.
Fine, I suppose you got a point. But what's the first step?
The first step in WikiHow's How to Talk to the Dead, 10 Steps with Pictures, suggested shifting our focus to a higher realm, if simply focusing on the image of our dead loved ones wasn't sufficient enough to form a connection.
See, this is already dumb, Dad said. For one thing, who says we love these things?
He nodded at you and the other two corpses on the couch.
Plus, obviously we can see them. They're here. So why the hell would we need to focus on the image of them? All we gotta do is look at them.
Hunched over the laptop, Andy said, Says here we gotta make ourselves consciously aware of what it would be like to be ourselves, like in the present moment.
What the fuck does that mean?
Hell if I know. What's it like to be yourself right now?
Well, Dad said, I gotta say, it's not fucking great, in case you hadn't been paying attention. I'm kinda decomposing over here.
What about you, Dylan? What's it like to be you? The question alarmed me in a way I had not expected. I don't know, I blurted out. It wants us to take note of where we are, what time it is, and what our feelings are like. Evidently, if we don't do this, we might experience some trouble returning to our sense afterward.
This all seems pretty redundant, Dad said.
Once our physical awareness declines, we're supposed to focus on the other energy.
What other energy?
I guess like the energy surrounding us in the living room. But we ain't supposed to search for it. Otherwise, we won't find it. We just gotta, be open to the idea of there being other energy. And if we feel anything like a spirit or whatever, then we can ask it some questions. But it says here that sometimes they don't always respond with words, but with emotions.
Emotions? Dad said. What kind of emotions?
Andy shrugged. He doesn't say. The second step in WikiHow's How to Talk to the Dead, 10 Steps with Pictures, introduced the possibility of talking through the power of our minds. We pushed the coffee table against the wall and sat on the carpet in the middle of the living room with our legs folded Indian style, which isn't the easiest position to accomplish while physically deteriorating. Comrade kept trying to investigate by sticking her snout in our crotches, but Andy convinced her to leave us alone after coughing up a couple milk bones from his duffel bag. Okay, Andy said. Now we're supposed to close our eyes, empty our minds of anxiety and thought. Dad glanced over like he wanted to attack him.
Did you just say empty my mind of thought?
That's what the article said.
And how the hell does someone do that exactly?
I don't know. It didn't specify.
You want to know what happens if I start trying to empty my mind of thought?
Dad asked.
I start thinking about not thinking, which is just another thought. And then I think, oh no, now I'm thinking about not thinking, and suddenly I'm thinking about the fact that I'm thinking about not thinking, and the panic never ends. It only multiplies. Only assholes can empty their mind of thought.
And corpses, I added, not taking my eyes off you up there on the couch. I hadn't seen you move yet, but I wasn't convinced you wouldn't. Dylan has a point, Andy said.
What are you talking about?
Dad asked. If you're having such a hard time not thinking, then maybe that means you aren't as dead as you thought.
And what are we?
Andy shrugged.
Something else. Something else like what?
I don't know, something weird. He leaned over and read the laptop again, then said, Okay, it wants us to fix an image of our deceased loved one in our...
Again, Dad said. This article's making a lot of bizarre assumptions.
Wouldn't it be more bizarre if it assumed the physical corpses were in the room with us?
Not to me,
Dad said. Okay, fair enough, Andy said. Then let's stare at the bodies instead, since we got 'em here with us.
Stare and do what?
Well, the article says we ought to ask our deceased loved one, or whoever, I guess. It don't gotta be a loved one, I suppose. Anyway, we ought to ask them a question once we've held that person's image in our mind long enough. Or stared at them long enough in our case. And then we wait for them to answer. Sometimes they might answer, telepathically, I guess, like in our minds. But we gotta be careful and not get too anxious for a reply, otherwise we might imagine they're saying something. Patience, the article says, is a...
Hey, you!
Dad said, staring at his own corpse.
Dead me. Yeah, I'm talking to you, you piece of shit. What the hell's going on here? What are you? Why is this happening? Answer me, goddammit!
Dead Dad remained motionless on the couch, his lifeless eyes focused on something in the corner of the room as maggots treated his exposed belly button like a fast food ball pit.
Well, there you have it, Dad said. They're not talking.
Of course not, Andy said. You're talking to him like a goddamn jerk. Would you engage someone in conversation if they spoke to you like that?
I'd probably break their jaw, Dad said. Not just sit there and take it like a coward.
Andy chuckled. Dude, I've seen you fight. You ain't breaking nobody's jaw.
I'll break my jaw against your jaw. You want to test me?
Are you threatening to violently kiss me?
What?
Dad said.
What are you talking about?
Why would your jaw break my jaw? Unless you're trying to kiss me. But like in a really weird, psychotic way.
I never said anything about kissing you. I was talking about headbutting.
Who headbutts with their jaw?
Maybe I do, okay? You ever think about that?
I don't think that's how you're supposed to headbutt.
How about I headbutt how I want, and you headbutt how you want?
Now I'm afraid you're going to have to headbutt me, Andy said. Wait a second, I said, troubled by the implications of their conversations. Do heads really have butts? The third step in WikiHow's How to Talk to the Dead 10 Steps with Pictures was remarkably similar to the second step, except it wanted us to ask basic yes and no questions, while also specifying how they should respond. For example, the article told us the most common methods used were flashlights or knocking.
What do you mean by knocking? Dad said. Who knocks?
Well, ideally the person we're trying to talk to. Like we tell them knock once for yes and twice for no.
But they can't knock.
We don't know that. Dad shook his head.
If they could knock, they would have fucking knocked. They would have shown some type of movement. Have you seen them move?
He glanced down at me.
Have you?
No, I said, disappointed. I haven't.
Well, there you have it. They can't move.
What about flashlights? Andy asked.
What about flashlights?
That's another way of getting them to talk.
What? How? Like shining it in their eyes until they tell us to leave them alone?
No, you don't shine it in their eyes. That's you being a jerk again.
Okay, then what?
You gotta get a flashlight with a button on the end. One that can easily be turned on and off. Then you power it on, unscrew the front of it so the light kind of dims down, and set it down on the floor. You give instructions to the spirit to tap the button once for yes, twice for no.
Andy, Dad said, if they can't knock, what the hell makes you think they're going to be able to operate a flashlight?
Maybe their spirits can operate a flashlight.
My spirit is going to shove a flashlight up your ass.
Andy sighed. Somehow I don't think you're taking this seriously.
Okay,
Dad said.
I think that's enough WikiHow bullshit for one day.
But we hadn't finished all the steps, Andy said, almost whining.
Why don't you tell me what the rest are first? Because so far, let's say I'm not exactly impressed.
Of course you're not impressed, Andy said. You're a corpse. Not much is going to impress you at this point. I thought you said we weren't corpses, I said, because we can think about not thinking.
Yeah, Dad said. What about what he just said?
Andy sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. We gotta skip the next step anyway, if it makes you feel better.
Why? What's wrong with it?
Dad asked. It wants us to hire a medium. What's that? I asked.
Some kind of psychic huckster, Dad explained.
I looked up prices online last night, Andy said, because some of them will Skype into you. But holy crap, none of us can afford something like that. Not on UPS salaries. Same with Step 5, which wanted us to buy a bunch of EVP shit, like what those ghost hunter shows use.
Well then, how much is Step 6?
Dad asked, sounding as sarcastic as a dead but not quite dead person could sound. About $20, Andy responded, then removed another item from the duffel bag. A Ouija board. Brand new by the look of it. The box was wrapped in plastic, with a big Walmart price tag sticker flattened along the bottom corner. It had cost him $18.59 plus whatever tax made it out to be. The front of the box presented 2 sets of children's hands maneuvering a planchette over a wooden spirit board. Above the hands, in simple font, it read, Ouija board. And below the hands, Mystifying Oracle. To the left of the bottom subtitle, the board claimed to be appropriate for anybody 8 years of age or older, and to the right of the bottom subtitle it read, Sturdy Wood Board with Original Graphics.
You gotta be fucking kidding me,
Dad said. I mean, we might as well give it a try, right? Andy asked, considering I already bought it and all.
I cannot believe you purchased a Ouija board, Dad said. Of all the weird shit I've seen at your place, somehow this surprises me the most.
Typically, I'd say these things are full of shit, Andy said. Another scam conceived by Lady Capitalism. He held up his finger. However, I think we've reached a point in our investigation where we might as well try. I'm about out of other ideas. What about you? Dad threw up his hands, defeated.
Fine, okay. I guess we're gonna really do this then. That all right with you, Dylan?
I was caught off guard at first. They hadn't exactly been asking my opinion on anything else they'd tried today. I said, which was evidently all the permission they needed to proceed. Let's do this shit, Andy said, tearing apart the game's wrapping and opening the box. I'm not sure how we settled on using you for the planchette operator instead of the other 2 corpses. Maybe it simply boiled down to who weighed the least. Andy scooped you up and propped you on the carpet next to us, leaning against the couch. You did not seem annoyed or fazed whatsoever by the disturbance. Your head swung down, chin digging into your chest, and several handfuls of maggots dropped out of your eyes, nose, and mouth. But other than that, you didn't move. Andy brushed the maggots off your lap, and I reached out to stop him. There was no point discarding them like that. They belonged with you, just as my maggots belonged with me, and Dad's maggots belonged with him. Andy kept gagging at the sight of them. He didn't understand the connection we had all started forming with our individual insects. But that was okay. He didn't need to understand. This wasn't about him. We set up the Ouija board on the floor next to your right thigh and guided your arm down to it, rotted fingers touching one end of the planchette while Andy sat across from you and operated the opposite side.
Shouldn't he be doing this all by himself?
Dad asked. He and I stood above you and Andy, watching like nervous spectators. Andy shook his head. Ain't you ever seen a movie? You can't do this shit with one person. It just doesn't work like that.
Maybe Dylan should do it, Dad said, since, it's his,
My what? I wanted to ask. My corpse? I'm doing it, Andy said. Why? Because I'm already down here and getting up hurts my knees. What should we ask? What do we want to know more than anything? Does a girl really do the voice for Bart Simpson? I blurted out.
How many times do I gotta tell you that's true before you believe me? Dad asked. We don't need the dead to answer a question like that. You can Google it if you don't believe me. Andy cleared his throat and gave us an annoyed look, then refocused on the Ouija board. Are you human? The planchette didn't move, so he continued with further questioning. Are you from another planet? No response. Are you from another point in time? Like, are you fucking time travelers or something? No response. Do you know who we are? No response. Are you here to hurt us? No response. Are you here to protect us? No response. Did the FBI assassinate Martin Luther King Jr.? No response. This is useless, Dad said. You wasted your money on this thing. Actually, I wasted your money, Andy said. What? I may have swiped your debit card before leaving yesterday. Are you serious? What does it matter to you? It's not like you're going shopping anytime soon. I fully expect you to Shut up, Andy whispered, frantic. What? Something's moving. We leaned closer to the Ouija board and realized he was telling the truth. The planchette had started wobbling. What's it doing? I asked, seconds before it slid toward the letter I, dragging both Andy and your hand along with it. Holy shit, Dad said, and neither of us said another word, instead witnessing in silence as the planchette continued slithering around the board from I to M to P to O to S to I kicked the Ouija board. The planchette flew across the living room. I don't know why I did it, but I did. I'm the one who interrupted it. I'm the one who kicked it. It wasn't an action I planned out. It was purely instincts. Suddenly, as we watched the Ouija board do its magic, I was hit with an overwhelming fear. A fear of what? I'm not quite sure, but I was positive I did not want to find out what word was being spelled. Afterward, once Andy and Dad had fully observed what happened, they looked up at me and asked what the hell my problem was. I don't know, I said. I'm sorry. You're sorry? Andy said. The hell is that supposed to mean? Calm down, Dad said. How can I calm down? How can you be calm? We finally almost get some kind of message from these dead fuckers, and your son goes and ruins it? I'm sure it was an accident. An accident? Andy let out a laugh. He straight up kicked it across the room like a goddamn soccer ball. Why did you do that, Dylan? Dad asked. It didn't feel right, I said. It felt wrong. It felt wrong, Andy said. And what has everything up until now felt then? Fine? Hunky-dory? Little dude, this shit has felt wrong from the get-go. So what? What was it saying? Dad asked. I don't know. I didn't get to finish. Andy surveyed the living room until he found a black Sharpie on the coffee table, then hurried over to an empty wall next to the kitchen entrance and wrote out the letters previously spelled on the Ouija board. I-M-P-O-S. That's as far as we got before Dylan got kick-happy. How many words could that spell? Dad asked. I don't know, but we're gonna find out. Impossible, imposter, impose, impost, imposition, impostume. After an hour of brainstorming and internet browsing, we narrowed down the possible spelling to 6 words. Some of them made more sense than others. Andy wrote each one on the wall in huge capital letters, ignoring Dad's request to use a sheet of paper like a normal person. The first 2 words, impossible and imposter, were easy enough to understand, but the rest we felt obligated to research on Merriam-Webster.com. Impose meant to force into the company or on the attention of another, which felt relevant to our situation, so we didn't rule it out. Impost could have meant a couple of things. An impost could be a tax of some kind, or it could also be considered a block, capital, or molding from which an arch springs. None of us could figure out why you would have been warning us about architecture, but the tax definition didn't feel entirely unrelated.
Were you telling us we needed to pay a tribute? Had you and the other 2 corpses come here to collect on a debt we owed? Imposition was pretty much the same as the last word, except the wording on Merriam-Webster.com sounded a little bit more sinister in this instance. An excessive or uncalled for requirement or burden. Yikes. Imposthume was labeled archaic and linked to the definition for abscess, which was defined as a localized collection of pus surrounded by inflamed tissue. Pus? I said, hovering over Andy's shoulder as he clicked on the dictionary link. Like from pimples? Andy snorted a laugh. Did you just say puss? That's what it says. I pointed at the screen as if he couldn't somehow see it right in front of him. What? Dad said, rushing over to the laptop. Andy was too busy cracking up to respond. A second later, Dad was joining him, but at least he was nice enough to tell me it's pronounced puss and not puss. Oh, I said. A local collection of puss is something very different, Andy said. Maybe if y'all get out of this in one piece, I'll take you to one. Dad said. No, you won't. And we'll talk about it later. He stood in front of the list he'd written on our wall, hands on his hips, admiring his handiwork. Shit, all these words make sense for what's going on here. Which one do you think it is? I asked. Well, I have my suspicions. It's none of them, Dad said. This is stupid. That corpse didn't try spelling something. Then how do you explain what we saw? You were clearly guiding it. Andy tossed his marker on the coffee table and cocked his head. What are you trying to say? I'm saying that Ouija boards are bullshit, and you are the one moving the planchette. Intentionally? That I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. What the fuck's your problem, man? What's my problem? Dad said. I don't know. Why don't you tell us where you really were today? What are you talking about? You went to work at UPS? You don't think I don't know what day it is all of a sudden? Since when do you deliver packages on a Sunday? Since when has any of us? Oh my God, Andy said. Would you listen to yourself? You sound like a fucking nerd. Despite his anger, Dad laughed. What? That's your response? I'm a nerd? Yep, you got it, partner. A great big fucking nerd. Why don't you go marry your calendar? You love it so much. Where were you? Well, maybe it's none of your business. You ever consider that? No, Dad said. Screw that. You're afraid to tell us for a reason, and I want to know why. Andy nodded, slowly in a deliberate motion that made me afraid physical violence was on the verge of erupting between the two of them. Then some of the tension in his body loosened, and he slumped his head and said, I was on a date, okay? A date? Yeah, with Candy from the body farm. With everything going on here, you decided to leave and go have sex? Now, wait a second. No one said we've had sex yet. Some hand stuff, sure. But you told her, didn't you? What? That's why you're keeping it a secret, Dad said. You told her about us, about what's happening. I may have mentioned a few details. God damn it. What did she say? What the fuck are you so cranky about? It's Candy. We can trust her. Why can we trust her? Because she jerked you off? Well, for one thing, it was a mutual jerking off, so why don't you... I thought we could trust you. You can trust me, he said. Candy promised to keep it a secret. Hell, you want my honest opinion? I don't even think she believed me, but I had to tell somebody, man. Don't you understand how fucking crazy all this is? Are you so used to it that it all seems normal? Well, let me break the news to you. This shit ain't normal. It's fucking weird. Now, if you'll excuse me, he pointed at the wall of IMPOS words, I have a puzzle to crack. If you want to help, great. If not, then shut up and let me think. You want to waste your time, Dad said. Go for it. Dylan and I have plenty of Simpsons episodes to watch. All this other crap is just a distraction. A waste of time. I'm done with it. Andy grinned. Just you wait. I'm going to solve this fucking retarded mystery and make you eat your words. Dad shrugged and collapsed on the love seat, fumbling for the remote and clicking play on The Simpsons. I stood between them trying to figure out what I was supposed to do, but Andy didn't seem to require my assistance either, so I gave up and returned my attention to the television, where everything was predictable, where everything was calm. I don't think either of us realized what Andy was doing till after he finished. By then, he'd been muttering a lot of crazy stuff, and we'd learned to mostly tune him out. The Ouija board incident had messed with his head big time. After writing the IMPOS word choices on the wall, he pretty much spent the rest of the evening pacing around in front of it, taking the time to thoroughly examine every letter. Dad and I kept exchanging glances, asking each other silent questions with our eyes, like, should we maybe give him some space and go do something in the kitchen? But neither of us budged, and I can't say for sure what Dad's motives were for staying in the living room, although I suspect we were probably operating along similar wavelengths, because you were why I didn't want to leave. You and the other two. I didn't know what Andy would do if we left him alone with you. He was freaking out in a way I'd never witnessed another human being behave before. Something in his brain had shifted or distorted or something. Once, a while back, we'd accidentally forgotten a lithium-ion battery outside, and it sat there on our porch for 2 whole days before anybody remembered. 2 days in the middle of summer. The battery had undergone a bizarre transformation. Its innards were bulging out of its swollen sides, acid and other sticky substances bleeding from various cracks. Yeah, in a way, that's a good description for our bodies as we all decomposed together. But also, that's how I started picturing Andy's brain after the Ouija board incident. Swollen and leaking dangerous liquids. So we stayed in the living room, half paying attention to The Simpsons, half paying attention to Andy's increasingly troubled muttering. Of course, we weren't that concerned, considering how easily he conned us into sitting in the 2 kitchen chairs he dragged into the living room, in front of the couch where we had previously pushed the coffee table out of the way. To be honest, I'm not sure where he produced the rope from. His truck? I like to think one of us would have observed him leaving the house, but who knows how much goes unnoticed when you're slowly rotting away to nothing. It's likelier the rope had been stored in his duffel bag, the same bag he'd used to conceal the Ouija board, which only makes me further wonder if the rope had been a part of the plan from the beginning. Otherwise, why pack it? Same with the Ouija board. Before he returned to the house that afternoon, he already knew he'd be utilizing both items. He had already made up his mind, except the way things unfolded, it felt like one item's purpose had solely served as the reaction to another item. Without the Ouija board's presence, there wouldn't have been any rope. At least, that was my logic when he tied Dad and me up in the living room. But now I realized the truth, that this was a false conclusion on my part. Without the Ouija board, there would still be a rope. There would always be a rope. The plan had always been to restrain us. I don't know if the plan originated before or after he departed Saturday night. If I had to guess, the idea planted itself in his head like a seed when he saw you on the couch for the first time on Friday. But it didn't start to fully blossom until he went home the following night and was alone enough to let his paranoid brain wander without interruption. So then why bring the Ouija board at all? Not only bring it, but first go to Walmart and purchase one. Who exactly was he trying to convince with it? Us or himself? I've gone over it 1,000 times, Andy said after double-checking the knots around our wrists. And the only word that makes sense, the only word the Ouija board could have realistically been spelling is imposters. You don't know that, Dad said. I'm fairly certain. You're guessing. Then you tell me what other word feels more appropriate. The only other one I can sort of see is impossible, but don't you think that's, a little redundant? No shit, this feels like an impossible situation. We've already established that. So what's the point in bringing it up again? If a Ouija board's got something to say, and if it actually says it, then god damn it better be something important, don't you think? It's not just gonna, waste our time on something as useless as impossible.
All the words fit. We already established that, Andy. What are you talking about?
Nah, Andy said, shaking his head, because he'd made up his mind and now there was no changing it, no matter what Dad said. It's gotta be imposters.
Okay,
Dad said, no longer trying to break free of his restraints.
let's say you're right, and it is imposters. What does that mean in this context?
You know damn well what it means.
Enlighten us, anyway.
It's not like the word contains that many different definitions, Max.
If you really believed I was an imposter, then you wouldn't be calling me by that name.
It's not like you've introduced an alternative.
That's because there ain't one.
At least not one my feeble human mind would be able to comprehend, experiencing it in your true language, right?
What?
What the hell are you talking about? Tell me exactly what you think is going on here. Seriously, walk me through it, step by step, so I can tell you why you're being so goddamn stupid. Does imposter mean we aren't real? I asked, having almost forgotten I also possessed the ability to speak.
Do you feel real?
Dad asked. I don't know, I answered with 100% honesty.
Aha!
Andy shouted and pointed an accusatory finger at me. You fuckers don't even know if you ain't actually imposters, do you? You don't know shit.
And neither do you,
Dad said. I know enough to question this entire goddamn mysterious corpse charade y'all tried pawning off on me.
What fucking charade?
Dad jerked his head toward the couch.
They're right fucking there. Don't believe me? Go touch them.
I didn't say they weren't real, Andy said. I'm saying the circumstances in which they supposedly were discovered is awfully suspect.
In what way?
In every goddamn way.
You want to try to be a little bit more specific?
You want me to be specific? Sure, I can be specific. I can be real fucking specific. Andy wiped drool from his mouth and increased the frantic speed of his pacing around the living room. It was impressive he didn't trip or knock anything over. How's this for specific? Friday night, late Friday night, I get a call from someone who hasn't spoken to me in at least a year. Someone who works for the same goddamn company as me. And if that ain't dedication to being an asshole, I don't know what is. So this guy, this real fucking prick, he gives me a ring out of the fucking blue and asks me to come over. Asks if I can come right away. Says it's urgent. He needs a favor. And no, it can't wait till morning. Remind you, this is all coming from the same guy who's been doing nothing but treating me like shit. Because of why? Because I refused to pick sides once our other best friend started dating his ex-wife. Because I'm a grown-ass man and I'm not going to allow myself to get sucked into some kind of sad, pathetic, high school soap opera bullshit. I never did a goddamn thing to nobody. And I get treated like that? Nah, fuck off. This world, this fucking planet, man, it don't matter what you do, does it? There's no winning. There's no escaping the petty drama forever fabricated by some dickhead's broken heart.
Andy,
And this is the kind of fucking guy asking me for a favor. Should I have helped him? Of course not. Should I have answered the phone when I saw his name on the caller ID? Hell no. But of course I did. Because despite everything that's happened, I like to believe I'm a pretty good fucking friend.
You've tied us up in our own living room,
Dad said. I'm getting to that.
Oh, you're getting to that. Okay, my bad.
Would you cool it with the sarcasm? I mean, seriously.
Okay, I'm sorry,
Dad said.
Proceed.
Now, imagine my surprise. Seriously, put yourself in my point of view if your species is capable of that level of empathy. Imagine my utter shock once I walked through the front door Friday night and saw what I saw. Hell, it's the same shit I'm seeing right now, if we're being honest. And we are being honest, aren't we?
I haven't lied to you about any of this, Dad said.
What did I see? Andy said, not waiting for either of us to respond. I'll tell you what I saw. I saw my old buddy Max and his little boy Dylan and his ex-wife Lori, and the three of them displayed out on the couch, just as they are now, dead as anything I've ever seen, killed by some unknown cause. And what else did I see? Both of you standing there, covered in dirt, hands in your pockets, trying your best not to look guilty as fuck. Guilty of what? Dad asked, which Andy was fully prepared to answer. Guilty of being imposters. So you're really saying you honestly believe me and Dylan ain't the real me and Dylan? I'm saying it's starting to sound more plausible by the second, yes. Okay then, who exactly do you think we are, besides imposters? I want you to be more specific. Tell us who we are, if I'm not me and Dylan ain't Dylan. I'm not me? I asked, alarmed and confused. I no longer knew what was true anymore. The longer this interrogation continued, the less confident I remained about anything concerning reality. It's not who you are, Andy said, but what. What? Exactly. What are we? I asked, catching on before Dad. Well, Andy said, that's what I'm aiming to find out. Oh, Jesus Christ, Dad said. What do you think we are? I don't know exactly. Obviously, you ain't from Earth. Your technology is far superior than any bullshit we got here. So that makes you extraterrestrials of some kind. Little green men, greys, motherfucking reptilioids, goddamn invasion of the fucking body snatchers. You know what I mean? You ever see that movie? Any of you? Because I have. And I know your goddamn tricks. I know what you do. You fucking pod people, dipshits. Go ahead and try convincing me there ain't a replica of myself somewhere out in that backyard in the process of morphing into its final form with the goal of replacing me. Replacing me like you replaced those poor sons of bitches on the couch. Like you replaced my friend. Well, I ain't gonna let it happen. You hear me? I ain't your fucking crab shell. I know what you are, and I know what's out there, and I'm gonna find it, and I'm gonna kill it. And then you're gonna tell me every goddamn thing you know and pray to whatever fucking stupid, retarded god you got on your bizarro planet that I spare you some motherfucking mercy. Are we crystal, fellas? Are we goddamn clear? He didn't hang around for a response. Instead, he marched out into the backyard, leaving us in the living room, tied to the kitchen chairs. What is he doing out there? I asked. Is he really digging more holes? It sure sounds like it. Rhythmic grunts filtered in through the open back door. From where we were tied up in the living room, neither of us could see exactly what Andy was doing, but he was making plenty of noises to paint a clear enough picture. I wondered what Dad's neighbors must have been thinking about all of this. Not just from Andy's frantic digging, but also from all the other insane sounds they surely picked up on throughout the weekend. My father and I, in particular, had partaken in our fair share of screaming, which is understandable, I think. Decomposing is not for the quiet. Were any of our neighbors concerned? What did they think was going on over here? We weren't throwing a party, not a normal one at least. A corpse party, maybe. But would they be concerned enough to call the cops? They would have already rolled up if so. Yesterday morning would have made the most sense for authorities to get involved when we woke up paralyzed, screaming in the purest agony any creature on this planet has ever experienced. But now, a man was simply digging holes in a backyard. Where was the crime in that? Do you think he's going to find anything? I asked. What? Dad said, snapping out of some daydream I wasn't privy to. Outside in the yard. Do you think there are other bodies? What other bodies? I don't know. Who else would be buried here? Maybe there is one of Andy, too, or Comrade. At the sound of her name, Comrade came trotting into the house, abandoning her master out in the harsh Texas heat. There's nobody else out there, Dad said, with an unsettling confidence. But how do you know? Because why would there be? It was so frustrating that he couldn't see the flaw in his own logic. But why would we be there? Why would we have been buried out there and not other people too? Because, Dad said matter-of-factly, it's my property. Behind the chair where Andy had tied my wrists together, something tugged violently at my arm. I tried glancing over my shoulder but failed to locate the source of the disturbance. Regardless, It didn't take a genius to decipher Comrade's wet snarls and growls. Dad eyed me with suspicion. "The hell's the matter with you? You got ants in your pants or something?" "Comrade's biting me." "She's what?" "She's trying to eat my arm." "Oh." He didn't seem that concerned about what I told him, but to be fair, neither did I. Does it hurt?" "Not really. It kind of tickles, I guess." "Like in a pleasant way?" I don't know. Not in an unpleasant way." "Son, this better not turn into some kind of bizarre fetish." "Some kind of what?" Dad chuckled. "Nothing. I was making a joke." "What does it mean?" "You don't need to know. The joke wasn't for you." An uncomfortable silence passed as I went over his words in my head. "Wait, who was it for?" "Nobody. It's not important." He didn't need to tell me. I already suspected the real answer. He had made the joke for himself, for his other self, dead Dad. The way Dad was tied up, he was forced to face the couch where you guys were lounging. How long had he been forced to stare at his dead, shirtless doppelganger without taking a break? He couldn't get up, and if he was like me, he couldn't close his eyes, which meant he'd had a lot of time to study his own corpse. "You're talking to the bodies, aren't you?" I asked. "You're trying to make 'em laugh." "Don't be silly," Dad said, nervous. "The dead can't laugh." "How do you know they can't?" "Because we'd know about it if they could. It'd be all over the news. This just in, corpses love jokes." "But how do you know these bodies can't laugh? They aren't like regular dead people, right?" "Good point," Dad said, then to his other self on the couch. "Hey, you! Hey, fatso! It's me, you! I mean, it's you, me! You know what I mean. Or is that I know what you mean? Anyway, Dylan here thinks you can laugh. Me, though? I call bullshit on that." "Dad, you sound crazy," I said, but he didn't seem to hear me. "So I thought we'd do a little test, see which one of us is correct. A laughing test, we'll call it. How does that sound? Don't answer that. Just listen. I want to talk about something no human being on this planet can find unfunny unless you're already dead and incapable of laughter, which you definitely are. And we're wasting our time here even entertaining this test, but let's give it a go anyway. You know, to satisfy the boy." "Dad." "So," Dad said to the corpse, "I don't know about you, but when I want to be put in a better mood, there's one thing that never fails to... Wait, what am I saying? I don't know about you. Of course I know about you. I know all about you. I know more about you than anyone else on this whole goddamn planet. You are me, right? And I'm you. So, if that's true, then that must mean you've already heard the story I'm about to tell you. But that shouldn't prevent you from laughing. That is, if you're capable of laughing. I've told this story to dozens of idiots over the years, friends, family, strangers, and it's never not made me laugh. And I'm sure Dylan has already guessed what I'm talking about." He was correct. I knew exactly what story he was building up to telling. Most of the time when he brought this up, I left the room or plugged my ears. Now I couldn't choose either of these escape routes. I'd be forced to sit there and listen to him embarrass me in front of not only you, but also your dead mother and your dead father. Plus Comrade, who had yet to abandon her dreams of eating me one limb at a time. "They can't hear you," I said. "They can't laugh. They can't talk." The words tasted repugnant as they left my mouth. If I couldn't convince myself, how was I going to convince someone else? Dad continued without bothering to acknowledge my weak response. All attention focused on his deceased counterpart. "Now, this must have been about 7 years ago, which would have made Dylan, 6 years old? Something like that. This is in that final stretch of blockbusters still existing, too. A couple months after this story ends, I think the rest of them shut down for good. Except for that one in Alaska, the one they're always talking about on the internet. But who could give a shit about Alaska, especially at a time like this? What matters is we were at Blockbuster in Texas, the whole family. Lori went in to return some DVDs and pick up whatever looked interesting on the newly arrived shelves, and Dylan and me stayed in the car listening to Duncan kick ass on the radio. This was when we had that stupid van. I don't know if you remember it, but it was god-awful.
Hated that thing. Lori's idea, obviously. So, we're out there in the parking lot, waiting. Dylan's sitting at the back of the van like he always did. He liked the privacy or something, I don't know. And this lady walks out of the video store. She gets in her car, which is parked to the right of us, and pulls out, only to then immediately swing into the spot to the left of our van. And I'm thinking, what the hell? Is this lady drunk or something? And she rolls down her window, then gestures for me to do the same. So I entertain her, and I roll it down, and I ask how I can help her. And by God, I swear, I'll never forget how she responded. Verbatim, this lady, she says, "I don't know if you're aware of this, mister, but your son was just flipping me the bird back there." Then she drove away, not so much as waiting for an apology. I remember being impressed by what she had said, largely because no one had ever called me mister like that before. Made me feel fancy, like in an old-timey sort of way. I liked it. Despite 7 years having passed, I could remember this incident clear as day. Yes, it was true. I'd given her the middle finger, but I didn't think she'd seen me. I thought I was being sneaky about the whole thing, but then, when she pulled into the other parking spot, I knew it was all over. I was busted. A tremendous fear seized me, gripped my heart, and tried squeezing it dry. Now, Dad continued, Dylan had obviously overheard what the lady had said because the instant I turned around in my seat and made eye contact with him, what did he do? "Dad, please," I said, hating this part of the story the most. "He started crying," Dad told his emotionless, decomposing doppelganger. I didn't have to say nothing, not a single word. Suddenly, he was bawling. The kind of heavy sobs that smear snot all over your face and shit. And I was like, "Dylan, what the hell?" And he started apologizing, shouting how sorry he was and begging me not to tell his mother. And then I promised him I wouldn't. It wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't like he'd fucking killed somebody or something, right? Lori would have probably never known either, except Dylan can't keep a secret for shit. That boy emerged from the womb looking guilty, I swear. "What's wrong?" Lori asked the silent van after getting back, and Dylan lasted all of 3 seconds before busting out the waterworks again. Then she turned to me, gave me a look like I was the one who'd done something to him, and said, "What the hell is going on here?" But I couldn't tell her, right? Because I'd made a promise. So I said, "You'll have to ask him," and drove out of the Blockbuster parking lot without another word. Comrade whined behind me. My arm tugged again. I wondered how much of it was left at this point. "Later on, we learned the whole story," Dad said to his corpse. "Dylan broke down and told us everything when we got home. That not only had he flipped off the lady at Blockbuster, but he had been flipping off strangers everywhere we went, whenever he had the chance. He couldn't help himself," he said. "He tried to stop, but the urge was too strong." Which meant any time we had driven anywhere around that time, Dylan would have been in the back of the van, flashing his little middle finger to any person we passed. Imagine that. You're going on about your day, minding your own business, when suddenly a random child is saying, "Fuck you." It'd wreck the rest of your evening. Psychologically, you'd be ruined. Of course, when we asked Dylan, he claimed he had no idea what it meant. That he'd seen Jim Carrey do it in that fucking Liar Liar movie and thought it looked funny. That was only half true. I had indeed seen it in Liar Liar, but I also knew exactly what it meant. Then Lori asked him if he ever do this at school, and Dylan said, oh God, I'll never forget this either. He said, "Not to other people." And Lori and I both looked at each other like, what the fuck does that mean? And what we found out was, well, every day at school, multiple times a day, he was excusing himself to the bathroom so he could stand in front of the mirror and flip himself off. Dad paused, since this was usually the part where, if they hadn't laughed already, they busted a gut. Except his audience wasn't making any noise. In fact, they weren't reacting at all. It was true what he told them. When I was younger, for a short spell, I was irrationally addicted to giving myself the middle finger. It wasn't a habit I personally found funny or cool. Instead, I was deeply ashamed and terrified somebody would catch me. At least when I was flipping someone else off, that was partially explainable.
But if someone had caught me doing it in front of a mirror, I don't know what I would say. I would have probably run away, and yet I had told my mom and dad as soon as the tiniest ounce of pressure was laid upon me. I spilled everything, and afterward, neither parent had known what to say. They just stared at me, emotionless, until one of them burst out laughing, followed by the other. Although, when I think about it, I cannot recall which one of them laughed first. Regardless, none of the corpses on the couch betrayed me by also laughing, including you, fortunately. I don't know what I would have done if you had laughed. Maybe you were just as embarrassed as I was about the situation. I can't help but wonder if there's a hidden deeper meaning behind my childhood middle finger addiction. Back then, I was obsessed with saying fuck you to my reflection. I craved the inexplicable hatred. I wanted more and more and more. How different is a doppelganger from a reflection? They aren't exactly the same, but there's an undeniable similarity.
Oh, well, Dad said. Tough crowd, I guess.
Dad, I said, barely a whisper.
What?
I stopped, and whatever I was about to tell him was lost as Comrade chose right then to retreat from her hiding spot behind us, trotting around our chairs and finding a spot in the carpet to stretch. I don't know how long we stared at her before I realized she had half my arm in her mouth. The hand, the severed hand, was balled into a fist. Except for the middle finger. It was pointing straight up. And I swear to God, in that moment, I heard maggots laughing. The few remaining ones lingering inside my decayed carcass, yes, but also any other ones still adventurous enough to be hanging around our house. Forgotten, abandoned, or whatever. They were here, and they were deeply, disgustingly amused. For the longest time, I'd mistakenly assumed that this casserole crackling in an oven noise was what maggots sounded like when they were screaming, when they were in pain, agony. But I'd been wrong. They'd never been screaming. All this time, they were laughing, howling with joy, because this was all a joke to them, and they were loving every second of it. Only then did my brain register that the rope was no longer restraining my wrists together. I brought my arms around, hoping it wasn't true, but of course it was. My left arm was missing, chewed off a couple inches below my elbow. Not a single drop of blood poured out. Some of that yellow liquid, the purge fluids, yeah, but no blood. Purge fluids and maggots. More maggots than I could possibly count, tumbling out of my exposed wound like an unstable cheerleader pyramid. It didn't hurt. None of it hurt. In the beginning of our transformation earlier this weekend, there had been pain. Immense pain. But now, the sensation was different. Like I had tried explaining to Dad, it tickled. Not in a pleasant way, but also not in an unpleasant way. Dad, I said, repositioning my elbow to prevent further maggots from spilling out, overcome with the strong need to protect them. Comrade took my arm.
I see that, he said. Are you okay?
I don't know.
Are you able to untie me?
I don't know.
Well, you think you might want to give it a shot.
I don't want to talk about what happened next. You were there, too, in the same room as the rest of us. So what's the point in bringing this up again? Do you really want to hear it? Because I sure don't. And if you're me and I'm you, shouldn't we want the same things? Okay, fair. Maybe that's wishful thinking on my part. But still, you have to understand why I don't want to linger too long here. None of this would have happened if I hadn't untied Dad. I didn't make him do what he did, but I absolutely helped him. I assisted. It doesn't matter that I didn't know what the outcome would be. The universe doesn't care about our inability to predict the future. It holds us accountable all the same. I did it. I untied him. It took some doing, considering I was working with one hand. Untangling a knot with only 5 fingers is not the easiest task, although it's not impossible.
Stay here,
Dad said, shambling through the kitchen and out the door. He didn't need to tell me twice. I stood in the living room and watched Comrade gnaw on my arm. She looked like she was in heaven. Existence no longer extended beyond herself and her new chew toy. She'd gotten what she wanted. She was content. I considered what I wanted, what object would give me a similar satisfaction, and failed to conceive of anything worthwhile. I didn't want my arm back. As far as I was concerned, Comrade could keep it. Out in the yard, Dad and Andy started arguing. I couldn't make out what they were saying. They sounded angry. They sounded unpredictable. I sat on the floor next to the couch and grabbed your hand, which was dangling off the armrest. I would like to say that you squeezed my hand back, but maybe I just imagined it. I don't know. I think maybe you really squeezed. Let's say you did, okay? Just this one time. We can pretend. A new noise erupted in the yard, drowning out their yelling. A machine noise. It took me a second to recognize the sound, but once I did, it was indisputable. Someone had turned on the hedge trimmer. I'd forgotten all about it. We must have left it in the yard after discovering you in the garden. And now it had been rediscovered. I didn't need to guess which one of them had found it. Andy's angry shouts transformed into a gargled scream. Then the hedge trimmer cut off, and the yard was once again occupied by silence. A couple minutes later, Dad entered the house and shut the door. The front side of him was covered in fresh blood, from someone who could still bleed. "Well," he said, after catching me staring at him. What? "Are we going to continue our Simpsons marathon or not?"
And that was Section 3 of Maggots Screaming, titled Active Decay. Stay tuned for the next episode, Section 4 of Maggots Screaming, titled Skeletonization, baby. Only 2 sections of the book left. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're enjoying life. I hope you're doing okay. Thank you for being alive. Well, thank you for being dead. I don't know who's listening to this. I'm dead. I'm fucking undead. Look at me go, baby. Look at me go.
Live spooky, die spooky.
Rest in peace, Max.